to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited China ahead of his trip to Saudi Arabia in a bid for stability amidst escalating tensions. Blinken's diplomatic efforts were met with a chilly reception from Chinese President Xi Jinping, who emphasized the need for partnership and honesty to avoid vicious competition. 2 hospitals in Ukraine's capital, Kiev, were evacuated over concerns of targeted Russian strikes after a video circulated online suggesting an imminent attack on these medical facilities. Over 70 tornadoes hit the central United States, with most of them occurring around Omaha, Nebraska, according to the National Weather Service. And Taiwan experienced at least 10 earthquakes, with the strongest measuring 6.1 magnitude. According to the Central Weather Administration, no tsunami warnings were issued. And a new report from the Food Security Information Network reveals that nearly 282 million people faced acute hunger in 2023, a staggering 24 million increase from the previous year. In a bid for stability amidst escalating tensions, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made a diplomatic visit to China ahead of his trip to Saudi Arabia. Now, Blinken sought a diplomatic opening, but his efforts were met with a chilly reception. Today, during his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, Blinken received a clear message. President Xi Jinping said the two countries should be partners and not rivals, mutually gain achievements, not hurt each other, seek common ground while reserving differences instead of vicious competition. Both sides should keep their word instead of saying one thing and doing another. That's right, Blinken was told not to say one thing and do another. While securing a meeting with President Xi Jinping may seem like progress, it's also worth noting that President Xi doesn't meet with many visiting diplomats. However, the agenda wasn't entirely aligned. Blinken aimed to focus on improving military-to-military contacts and easing travel between the U.S. and China. But Beijing had other priorities. Now, instead of dwelling on these issues, China made it clear to Blinken about its red lines. Foreign Minister Wang Yi emphasized this.
But at the same time, the negative factors in the relationship is still increasing and building. And the relationship is facing all kinds of disruptions. China's legitimate development rights have been unreasonably suppressed, and our core interests are facing challenges. Should China and the United States keep to the right direction of moving forward with stability or return to a downward spiral? This is a major question before our two countries. China's concerns are consistent. We always call for respecting each other's core interests and urge the United States not to interfere in China's internal affairs, not to hold China's development back, and not to step on China's red lines on China's sovereignty, security, and development interests.
Now, these red lines include areas like the South China Sea and Taiwan, where tensions between the U.S. and China are high. Just this week, the U.S. approved fresh military aid for Taiwan and began military drills with the Philippines, further challenging China's stance. Blinken, however, gave no indication of backing off, though he emphasized the importance of continued dialogue to avoid misunderstandings and miscalculations.
In today's meetings, I discussed the PRC's dangerous actions in the South China Sea, including against routine Philippine maintenance operations and maritime operations near the second Thomas Shoal. Freedom of navigation and commerce in these waterways is not only critical to the Philippines, but to the U.S. and to every other nation in the Indo-Pacific, and indeed around the world. That's why so many nations have expressed concern about the PRC's maritime maneuvers. I made clear that while the U.S. will continue to work to de-escalate tensions, our defense commitments to the Philippines remain ironclad.
But expectations of China behaving responsibly might be overly optimistic. China has a history of disregarding established rules, including rules of engagement, the looming ban on TikTok in the U.S., and growing tensions over Russia add fuel to the fire. Blinken raised concerns about China's support for Russia's aggression against Ukraine, but Beijing showed no signs of relenting.
China is the top supplier of machine tools, microelectronics, nitrocellulose, which is critical to making munitions and rocket propellants, and other dual-use items that Moscow is using to ramp up its defense industrial base. A defense industrial base that is churning out rockets, drones, tanks, and other weapons that President Putin is using to invade a sovereign country, to demolish its power grid and other civilian infrastructure, to kill innocent children, women, and men. Russia would struggle to sustain its assault on Ukraine without China's support.
In fact, with Putin's upcoming visit to China, there are speculations that China might double down on its support to Russia, potentially supplying dual-use components for military purposes.
Планируется визит в мае. Я обязательно возьму.
As tensions continue to escalate, the prospect of thawing relations between the U.S. and China appears increasingly unlikely. In a recent development, TikTok's parent company ByteDance has denied plans to sell the popular video app. Now, this comes after the U.S. Congress passed a law requiring ByteDance to divest TikTok or face a ban. ByteDance previously dismissed reports it was considering a sale without TikTok's key recommendation algorithm. And they've reiterated their stance, stating they have no intention of selling the app. U.S. lawmakers have expressed national security concerns with TikTok under Chinese ownership. They allege it could be used on data collection, espionage, or propaganda. Now, TikTok vehemently denies these accusations, maintaining they've never shared user data with China and won't in the future. The company's CEO plans to challenge the new law in court. Frightening scenes unfolded in Ukraine's capital today as two hospitals were evacuated over concerns of targeted Russian strikes. Kiev officials say the evacuation comes after a video circulating online suggested an imminent attack on these medical facilities. They specifically point to comments made by the head of Belarus KGB, who accused the hospitals of harboring Ukrainian military personnel. Kiev vehemently denies these claims, calling it an absolute lie.
Агресор безпосередньо погрожує ударом по нашому медичному закладу, навіть називають адресу, вулиця Богатирська, тут знаходиться дитяча лікарня, мотивуючи тим, що тут перебувають військові, можете зайти, подивитись, в лікарні перебувають виключно пацієнти, які лікуються тут.
Now, one of the evacuated facilities is a children's hospital located on Bokatsritska Street. AFP journalists witnessed numerous ambulances waiting to transport patients. Kiev Mayor Vitaly Klitschko emphasized the importance of safety.
Це ключове питання – забезпечити безпеку дітей, персоналу. Ми робимо зараз терміново, переводимо в інші лікувальні заклади наших дітей, пацієнтів. Також ми співпрацюємо з правоохоронними органами і службами безпеки.
Miraloska Timchenko, a woman on maternity leave who was present during the evacuation, expressed her fear.
Це все страшно, що коли діти мають знаходитися під наглядом лікарів, їх повинні або десь евакуювати в іншу лікарню. І наразі це дуже, я розумію, що це дуже складно.
This evacuation comes amidst ongoing tensions in the region. The U.S. recently announced an additional $6 billion in military aid for Ukraine.
I'm also pleased to announce today an additional commitment of $6 billion through our Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. That will allow us to procure new capabilities for Ukraine from U.S. industry. This is the largest security assistance package that we've committed to date.
The support to Ukraine is not just for Ukraine. Our efforts to assist Ukraine sets an example. Should Russia win, the repercussions will be felt well outside Ukraine's borders, risking further escalation.
The race for dominance has reached a new high ground, outer space. Recently, the United Nations witnessed a clash over the future of the cosmos. The U.S. and Japan proposed a resolution to keep nuclear weapons out of space, but Russia slammed the brakes with a veto. Joan Soriano has more.
Tensions are rising over the future of outer space. Today, the UN Security Council rejected a resolution aimed at preventing an arms race in space. The vote came after Russia vetoed the measure, which was backed by the United States and Japan. The draft resolution, proposed by the US and Japan, called on all countries, especially those with advanced space programs, to commit to the peaceful use of space and avoid an arms race. However, Russia blocked the resolution, calling it a dirty spectacle and a cynical ploy by the West.
Today, our council is once again being involved in a dirty spectacle prepared by the US and Japan. This is a cynical ploy. We're being tricked. This time, it's being promoted by Japan and US, who authored the draft resolution we're to vote on. At first glance, it looks harmless. It looks positive. Because officially, it's devoted to a topic that's of great importance to the international community. That's the non-placement of WMDs in outer space. Yet behind this fig leaf, there was a cunning plan that was concocted by our Western colleagues. It has nothing to do with the laudable objective I mentioned earlier.
The U.S. accuses Russia of developing a nuclear-armed satellite that could devastate vital communication and navigation infrastructure. They argue Russia's veto raises questions about their commitment to the Outer Space Treaty, which bans placing weapons of mass destruction in space.
We are not talking about a weapon that can be used to attack human beings or cause physical destruction here on Earth. Any anti-satellite capability should be of general concern.
Russia denies these accusations and claims to be firmly committed to the treaty. They say the U.S. resolution is a ploy to distract from their own lack of commitment to a peaceful space environment.
They're cherry-picking WMDs out of all the other kinds of weapons. That's Washington, Tokyo, and their allies are trying to camouflage their lack of interest in outer space, in principle being free from any kinds of weapon. This is something the Russian Federation and China have been insisting on since 2008. As a minimum, it's as if they haven't built a house yet. They haven't even agreed that a house would be built, but they're already installing a roof over the spot where the house will be erected.
Experts warn that an arms race in space could have catastrophic consequences. A single nuclear detonation could cripple communication and navigation systems around the world. The U.S., which relies heavily on satellites for everything from military operations to financial transactions, would be particularly vulnerable.
We have only begun to understand the catastrophic ramifications of a nuclear explosion in space. How it could destroy thousands of satellites operated by countries and companies around the world and wipe out the vital communications, scientific, meteorological, agricultural, commercial, and national security services we all depend on.
The international community will need to find a way to address these concerns and ensure the peaceful exploration and use of outer space. Joanne Soriano for Net 25 News.
Dozens of tornadoes hit the central United States. The National Weather Service reported over 70 tornadoes across the country, with most of them occurring around Omaha, Nebraska. Now, these powerful storms destroyed homes, knocked down power lines, and caused at least 3 injuries. Images shared on social media showed large black twisters sweeping through the sky, picking up and tossing dirt, debris, and materials in their path. The Omaha suburb of Elkhorn was hit hard, with many homes destroyed, roofs blown off, and trees stripped off their leaves. Emergency personnel are on the scene to check damaged homes and help anyone injured. Further south, a tornado hit an industrial shed near the Nebraska state capital of Lincoln. Fortunately, 70 people inside were evacuated. but 3 suffered non-life-threatening injuries. PowerOutage.com reported that around 11,000 households were left without power in Nebraska. The National Weather Service issued numerous urgent tornado warnings in several central U.S. states on Friday and warned that powerful storms would continue till Saturday U.S. time in the Central Plains, extending as far south as Texas. Tornadoes are a common weather phenomenon in the U.S., especially in the central and southern parts of the country. And despite their frequency, they remain difficult to predict and awe-inspiring yet destructive natural disasters. Now, what began as a protest at one university has now escalated to involve 24 institutions. Students are rallying for justice for Palestinians, but the demonstrations have also been marred by reports of anti-Semitism. The situation has escalated to the point where classes have been disrupted and commencement ceremonies canceled. However, what's drawing attention now is the heavy-handed response from police and law enforcement. The protests have now spread from Columbia University to prestigious institutions like Harvard, NYU, Yale, Emerson, Georgetown, and Emory. Students have taken to camping on campuses, leading to class suspensions and the shift of commencement ceremonies to online platforms. And their demands include a permanent ceasefire and the cessation of U.S. aid to Israel. While the universities deny allegations of anti-Semitism, the focus remains on the aggressive tactics employed by law enforcement.
If someone is on campus and they are in physical danger, if they are about to be attacked, for example, we're going to respond immediately, again, as we would in any location. But in terms of the decisions of the university in this regard, that's really a question for the university.
In Texas, for example, police clashed with protesters, resulting in several arrests and disturbing scenes of brutality. Reports also indicate that students were pushed to the ground and faced with tear gas, while some even had their phones broken by police. One student expressed the trauma caused by the violence, highlighting the fear among students to return to campus.
Because of, the system and the extremely oppressive system, in fact, they're bringing police officers upon their own students, stuff like that. We just don't feel that our universities are universities that we want to be at and we want to go to.
Similar incidents occurred at Emory University, where rubber bullets were reportedly used against protesters.
And that peaceful protest was met with outrageous, excessive force, not only from the Emory Police, but from the Atlanta Police Department.
Protests show no signs of abating, though, with negotiations, class cancellations, and crackdowns failing to quell the unrest. With the movement spreading to more universities, it's clear that the U.S. must address the issues at home before assuming a role as a peacemaker abroad. A new report paints a grim picture of global hunger. The Food Security Information Network reveals that nearly 282 million people faced acute hunger in 2023, and that's a staggering 24 million increase from the previous year. Conflicts, particularly in Gaza and Sudan, were major drivers, but extreme weather and economic woes also played a role. Mayan Glosser reports from Geneva, Switzerland.
We're bringing you troubling news from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO, here in Geneva, Switzerland. A new report paints a grim picture of global hunger, with a staggering number of people facing severe food insecurity.
More than 281 million people in 59 countries and territories face levels of acute food insecurity that are classified in line with IPC classification as crisis, emergency, and catastrophe.
That's a significant increase from 2016, with 1 in 5 people now struggling to feed themselves. The report highlights conflicts, extreme weather events, and economic shocks as the main drivers of this hunger crisis.
One step before famine affected over 36 million people, while the total population in catastrophe was more than 4 times higher than in 2016. The report also tells us that 60% of children experiencing acute malnutrition live in the 10 countries facing the highest level of acute food insecurity.
The situation is particularly dire in the Gaza Strip, which the report identifies as the most severe food crisis in its history.
Conflict and insecurity, along with extreme weather events and economic shocks, are the key drivers of food insecurity and nutrition crisis.
The World Food Programme warns that people in Gaza are resorting to desperate measures to survive.
We estimate 30% of children below age of 2 is now acutely malnourished or wasted. And 70% of the population in the north is facing catastrophic hunger. People cannot meet even their most basic food needs. They have exhausted all coping strategies, like eating animal fodder, and clearly some of them are dying of hunger.
Sudan is another major hotspot with over 20 million people facing emergency levels of food insecurity. The UN Children's Fund, or UNICEF, is particularly concerned about the impact on children.
Sudan is a major concern for the nutrition component because primarily of the major caseload. The number of people is staggering. And also for the difficulty of reaching these people. In many areas, there is impossible access or inconsistent access. 36.4 million children under the age of 5 are acutely malnourished, as reported in the report, and 9.8 million, so almost 10 million of these children are severely acutely malnourished and in urgent need of treatment. And these children are at an increased risk of dying. And even if they recover from malnutrition, they're likely to not meet their full cognitive or developmental potential.
The FAO emphasizes the urgency of providing humanitarian aid, particularly agricultural inputs.
It is absolutely critical that wherever it will be possible to access the people, we provide them with agricultural inputs on time so that they can plant their field.
This is truly a global challenge. There are far too many people waking up in the morning not knowing where their next meal will come from, not knowing how to feed their children.
This is a critical time for the millions facing hunger around the world. This is a developing story and will continue to follow the situation. Reporting from Geneva, Switzerland, this is Man Glauser for Net25 World News. Back to you.
Imagine a world where antibiotics, our life-saving defense against bacterial infections, no longer work. Now, this chilling scenario could become a reality thanks to the overuse of antibiotics during the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the World Health Organization. Now, new research by the WHO reveals a troubling trend. Despite COVID-19 being a viral illness, a staggering 75% of hospitalized patients worldwide received antibiotics, medicine useless against viruses.
The advice was very clear right from the start. This was a virus. So it wasn't that there was any guidance or recommendation that clinicians go in this direction, but perhaps because people were dealing with something completely new, they were looking for whatever they thought might be appropriate.
Now, this just-in-case approach has potentially fueled the rise of antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, where bacteria becomes resistant to the drugs designed to kill them.
The only time you would use antibiotics when you've got a viral infection is if you had a secondary proven bacterial infection that was sensitive to those antibiotics. So in other words, they were not being used appropriately. And if you are the main harm, of course, is that if you are using antibiotics, you're increasing the likelihood of antimicrobial resistance to those particular antibiotics, so that when you do need them for your bacterial infection, they are no longer so useful.
The overuse was particularly high in critical COVID-19 cases. 81% globally, and regions like Africa, 79% for mild-moderate cases. This widespread misuse is concerning because the WHO study also found that these commonly overprescribed antibiotics to have a higher potential to create resistant bacteria.
If you give somebody a medication that they don't actually need, you are always exposing them to an unnecessary risk. Every time you treat a person for any illness with any medication, a doctor will balance, will this medication do the job and prevent whatever the disease is, and is that a more important outcome than any of the potential risks?
Will we be able to outrun the superbug threat? The answer lies in our collective action. By using antibiotics wisely, we can preserve these life-saving tools for generations to come. A heartwarming story unfolds after an orphan killer whale calf named the Brave Little Hunter by the Ehatsat First Nation made a daring escape from a tidal lagoon where she'd been trapped for weeks. Her pregnant mother tragically died on the rocky shore in late March, leaving the young orca stranded. The Ehatsat First Nation and fisheries officials tirelessly attempted to reunite Brave Little Hunter with open waters, even using slings, recorded whale calls, and even violin music. But on Friday morning, a stroke of luck, under the cover of a starry night and high tide, Brave Little Hunter swam free. The First Nation reported she navigated past the sandbar where her mother passed, under a bridge and all the way down the inlet towards open ocean. While rescuers located her again in Esperanza Inlet, their goal now is to give her space, and they hope her calls will reach her family in the vast ocean. Authorities are urging the public to stay clear of the area to avoid disrupting this potential reunion. And this little orca's fight for survival has captured hearts worldwide, and everyone hopes Brave Little Hunter finds her way back to her pod. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angela. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.